Synopsis of the Books of the Bible. Minor Prophets. By JND Darby. Joel. Chapter 3. Circumstances of the last days detailed, the judgment of the nations. In Joel 3 the Spirit develops, with more detail, the circumstances of the last days, those days, in which God would bring back the captives of Judah and Jerusalem. This epoch precedes the time of peace and blessing, in which the curse shall be entirely taken away. It is the judgment of the nations, a judgment necessary for the vindication of the rights of God, with respect to his oppressed people, and for the manifestation, in the sight of the nations, of that which he is in his government of the earth. The 10 tribes are not here in question, nor the general restoration of Israel. Before the full blessing of his people, God must resume his immediate government of them, in the same place where he had given it up, again taking possession of the seat of that government, a seat which he had chosen himself. There will he plead in his power with all the nations that dispute his rights, manifesting himself in the midst of his people, and acting as dwelling with them, maintaining their rights as belonging to himself. Israel is his inheritance. The word Jehoshaphat means the judgment, or the scepter, of Jehovah or Jah. There, in judgment, he pleads with the nations for his people, whom they had scattered, and for his land, which they had parted. He recounts all the grievances of his people, as done to himself. By their means, the same evils should be recompensed in judgment upon the nations that inflicted them. The nations are called upon to prepare for war, they are all to assemble, they are to wake up, quitting their peaceful occupations, and come to the valley of Jehoshaphat. The Jehovah will sit to judge all the heathen round about. And if the Gentiles are to awaken all their mighty men for the day of God, God on his part will cause his mighty ones to come down. Verse 11. The execution of God's judgment on the earth. But, however great the pride of the men of war, it was, after all, the judgment of God, the sickle of God reaping the earth. His press should be full, his vats should overflow, for the iniquity was great. In the Apocalypse the harvest is distinguished from the vintage, the first being the judgment that separates the good from the wicked and vice versa, the second, the execution of vengeance. Here it appears to me that the two together present the general idea of the execution of the judgment, although the symbol of the winepress is the more forcible. What multitudes in that day should learn the consequences of their contempt of the word of grace, and of the pride that raised them up in rebellion against Jehovah of hosts. All governmental order, its grandeur and its power, should disappear before the judgment of God. Jehovah himself resuming the reins of government on earth from Jerusalem. But Jehovah himself should resume the reins of government on earth, and cause his voice to be heard from Jerusalem. The heavens and earth should tremble at his intervention. But if this intervention was the judgment of the rebellious, he who intervened, Jehovah, would be the hope of his people, himself the strength of the children of Israel. And thus should they know him to be Jehovah their God, dwelling in Zion, his holy mountain. Jerusalem should be holy, strangers should no more pass through it, profaning it as their prey. Nor this alone, but there should be abundant blessing on the land of his people, wine should flow down from their mountains, and milk from their hills. The rivers of Judah should flow with waters, and a fountain should come forth of the house of Jehovah, and water the valley of Shittim. Compare Ezekiel 47 and Zechariah 14 verse 8. Egypt and Edom should be made desolate, but Judah and Jerusalem should dwell in everlasting blessing, for Jehovah should have cleansed them. We perceive that it is effectual and sovereign grace. Joel's prophecy confined to Judah, Jerusalem, and Judea. It will be remarked also, that this prophecy does not go beyond the blessing of Judah and Jerusalem, that the scene of the judgment of the nations refers to the judgment accomplished in the land of Judea, where their armies will be assembled, accomplished to put Jehovah in possession of his throne upon earth, or rather, he takes possession of his throne by the execution of this judgment, and afterwards he bestows blessing on the people whom, in grace, he has cleansed. One devastating army is especially pointed out, that which comes from the north. It appears also that the desolation of the land, before the intervention of Jehovah, will be very great, so that the people will be a reproach among the nations, but woe unto those who should despise the people of God. If this army announces the day of Jehovah, Jehovah himself will interpose, that it may be in truth his own, And, in interposing, he delivers the people whom he loves.